There's no propaganda quite like military propaganda. Psychological operations, the term is. Psyops. Serious stuff. Aside from near unlimited money, you also don't have to deal with all those annoying ethical restrictions.
I just assumed it was news gathering. But having seen the process and worked in the process, I then realised this was a big project. So we would do the news items that would go out on the news and go out on various channels locally. And we were to make it, as best we could, look as if it was made locally.
Bell Pottinger specialised in military-grade propaganda. The British PR firm was active in Iraq for years, answering to the US commander there. They did crazy stuff, faked local news reports, smeared Iran, put together Al-Qaeda propaganda videos, planted them in people's homes and tracked who viewed them.
I was asked by my boss, we need to make this style of video and we've got to use Al-Qaeda's footage and all their propaganda out there to do it. And we're going to track it via Google Analytics.
Good times. Last year, Bell Pottinger lost its license after it emerged that it likely stoked racial tensions in South Africa as part of its work there. Thing with having morals is, once you lose them, it's difficult to pick them up again. But I digress. Guess what Bell Pottinger's former boss is up to?
The biggest diplomatic crisis in the Middle East since the first Gulf War.
A growing diplomatic crisis.
Qatar seems to be in crisis as more Middle Eastern countries sever diplomatic ties with Doha.
Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Egypt and the UAE have all cut diplomatic ties with Qatar.
You know the whole Qatar-Saudi Arabia schism where the two US allies almost came to blows? Yeah, that was helped by Charles Andrea, the man who oversaw Bell Pottinger's operations in Iraq. Propagandist extraordinaire.
Financial and logistical support for terrorists and terrorism, groups like Hamas, the Taliban, and Al-Qaeda, who operate freely out of Doha and use business and financial institutions to support radical Islam and global jihad.
Mr. Andrea was paid handsomely by a Dubai-based company to smear Qatar, tie it to terrorists, to Iran, tell everyone how bad and dirty it is, using the Iraqi formula.
Anywhere where Sunni radical Islamism is operational and has a significant operation going, we find the footprint of Qatar.
This documentary, it really isn't, became available on Netflix, YouTube. It was shown to Trump's former chief strategist, Steve Bannon, former CIA director David Petraeus, ex-defense secretary Leon Panetta. Just to make it clear, foreign money, Gulf Arab money, used to make a fake propaganda film by professionals and then shown to millions. Shown to some of America's most influential figures to promote an international conflict on fake grounds. This is Psyops, the big-time league of propaganda.
Murad Gazdiev, we have contacted the firm Andrea and Associates, which produced the film, as well as the Dubai-based company Lapis Communications, for comment. So far, no response. The film was released at a time when Gulf states cut diplomatic, trade and transport ties with Qatar, accusing it of supporting terrorism, something Doha has repeatedly denied. Back then, the US president sided with the majority of Arab nations, saying Qatar had a history of funding terror at a very high level. Saudi Arabia took the lead in the isolation campaign. And the kingdom's foreign minister is now warning the Qatari government that it could collapse if it doesn't pay for Washington's military presence in Syria.
Qatar should finance the US military's presence in Syria and send its own military forces there before the US president lifts American protection for Qatar. If the US is to withdraw its protection, represented by its military base in Qatar, then the regime there will fall within less than a week.
Yeah, just some background to this. The Saudi foreign minister was referring to the presence of over 11,000 US troops in Qatar. He made the remarks after Donald Trump called for money and ground support in Syria from his wealthy allies in the Middle East. However, security analyst and former British Army officer Charles Shubridge believes Riyadh should itself be worried over its friendship with Washington.
Saudi Arabia is using this issue as a stick to beat Qatar, and of course Qatar has used its considerable wealth to also attack, for example in propaganda terms, Saudi Arabia. Both countries have been uncomfortable allies for some time. Certainly they've both been backing the Syrian rebellion. Of course, in this particular instance, Saudi Arabia knows that Qatar is not in a position to physically provide troops on the ground simply because its armed forces are so small. But of course, they would like to see Qatar's finances further drained. It's interesting, Donald Trump's remarks himself, where he has said that without us, in other words, without the Americans, those countries would fall within hours or weeks or something like this, he said. This is a truth that is very rarely spoken publicly, and they want to then deflect attention onto one another